Well, it's changed a lot of timelines already. It's changed the timeline for the Democratic Convention. I'm still not sure there'll be a convention. It may be a virtual convention. It's changed the whole primary schedule. It's changed the fact that we used to campaign with lots of rallies and people going into communities and thousands of folks gathering in one place. That's all stopped, and it needs to stop. Uh, in fact, I think it's possible that you'll see a virtual Democratic convention even if it's rescheduled in August. One thing it means, by the way, is that candidates have to change their rhetoric. The rhetoric has to be less a search for applause lines and more the kind of speeches that Ronald Reagan gave, that FDR gave in his fireside chats, that JFK gave on the economy, civil rights, and the missile crisis, where you're communicating with people, but you're not waiting for them to applaud. Uh, so it's going to be a very different kind of campaign, at least for the next several months. Uh, we'll see whether or not we can have a Democratic convention in August. I think Donald Trump will be very upset if he can't have a Republican convention right afterwards because he wants people to cheer. And who knows what he'll say if the health folks say we don't really want to gather 30,000 people in a room.
A lot of times people seem to be so set already on who they're going to vote for based on their political parties. But how do you think that this pandemic is maybe changing voters' attitudes?
Well, Trump had a kind of bubble. I called it a bubble of hope at the beginning of this, where people wanted to approve of what he was doing because they're so worried about what's happening. Uh, but since then, those numbers have come back down. And except for one outlier poll, Joe Biden has a lead of like 8 to 10 points. So I think people understand that Trump's the only president we have right now, uh, and that we have to get through this pandemic. But I also think they're ready to move on in November. And Biden is a very comfortable place, I think, for most voters to move on, even though we're going to see a tremendous negative assault on him coming from the Trump campaign.
And I've been reading a lot, especially recently, about people wanting Cuomo to get into the race. Is that even a possibility at this point?
This is a hothouse media story, also a story promoted by the Republican Party. The Club for Growth took a phony poll based on this. It's not going to happen. Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee for president. And I think he is probably going to beat Donald Trump in November. Andrew Cuomo, who's done a terrific job in New York during this pandemic, says he's not running for president, and I absolutely believe him. There's no way he can be nominated. Joe Biden is going to end up with not just a majority of the delegates, but a very clear majority of the delegates. He'll be the Democratic nominee. The one thing that intrigues me, by the way, is for all his bluster, is President Trump actually going to debate in the fall? I think he may say, I don't like the debate commission. I don't like these mainstream journalists who are going to ask me questions. So what I want is to have a debate that I design where folks like Sean Hannity are on the panel, at which point, of course, there'll be no debate.
And so how do you think that helps or hurts Trump or Biden?
Well, look, I think Trump has some fundamental problems. The economy is in bad shape. Uh, it's not a good argument to say, gee, only, which is what he's now saying, sort of, gee, only 60,000 people have died in this pandemic. That's more folks than died, more Americans than died in the entire Vietnam War. I don't think that's a good argument. So I think Trump's in a weak position. He started out in a weak position. He has a very hardcore base. I think that hardcore base is 40% of the vote, for example, and then he gets a few more percent after that. But he's never reached out. He's never tried to expand beyond that base. And this pandemic is not only a tragedy, it was a chance for him to reach out and to act like president of all the people, which is what George W. Bush did in the couple of months immediately after 9/11.
So you believe, or not so much you, but based on the polls and the research that you've done, that there are people that are turning away from President Trump that supported him before this pandemic because of the way he is handling it?
Well, it's not just the pandemic, it's the way he's handled the presidency. We know in 2018, for example, that white women in the suburbs, who were the margin by which he won in 2016, voted Democratic and voted Democratic pretty decisively which is why the Democrats took back the House. So I think you're going to see independents, you're going to see white women in the suburbs tending to move away from the president, tending to move toward Biden. And I think you're going to see some, not all, but many of the folks who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump come back and vote for Biden. They're very comfortable with him. You know, one of Biden's contributions in 2008 to the Democratic ticket was that he had great strength in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, that industrial. There are now a number of stories, leaks out of the White House, saying that people around him wish he would tamp down on the press conferences, do them less often, make them shorter, stop attacking the press, stop attacking his enemies, and look like a president who was concerned only with what we do about this pandemic.
And as far as voter motivation goes, as a whole, do you believe that voters will be motivated by everything that's going on right now to actually cast the ballot? Often we talk about people just not voting at all.
I think we'll probably see the highest voter turnout in a presidential election since 1960 as a percentage of the population. The negative partisanship here is very powerful. It's a term coined by a political scientist named Rachel Bitecofer, and it refers to the idea that people vote against as much as they vote for. I think Democrats are going to come out in record numbers to vote against Trump. I think Republicans are going to come out. The base, the Trump base, is going to come out. So I think you're going to see very high turnout.
Wow, okay, we could talk to you all day, but unfortunately we're limited on time. Thank you so much for your insight.